Is that some countries that have made all the homework were suffering a lot. Death, imprisonment, criminality, and public health problems as well. And Jose Mujica, that was in his government, many people coming from civil society were hired as advisors in different ministries, start doing the work inside the government that we have been doing outside the government for years. So this is our lecture of the problem. Some definitions are affecting other countries. Based on security, public health, and human rights, was the main, as I've already told you, the objective of Presidente Jose Mujica. But after that, when for the second project, the second bill, we include this aspect. That's why our law includes, it's mandatory for the government to make research, harm reduction, not only for cannabis, but all the drugs, is mandatory right now in Uruguay. Have the third pillar of public health in drug abuse, in problematic drug use. And also because our former law, we have decriminalized in 1974. And it was awful, our situation. Criminality was increasing day by day. We have, it's similar to crack cocaine, but it's previous to crack cocaine these days. And our peaceful life, only interrupted during the dictatorship, was again a serious social problem. And this was a pressure on the government. You have to change this. And the authorities understood that the only way we could change this was legalizing cannabis, separate the markets. That's why we say that we applied a gondola strategy. You know, gondola in Spanish is how do you say, when you go to the supermarket, all the products are in this huge, how do you say? Donde poner aisle. Thank you. And you go to the supermarket to buy dentifrice, and finally you go outside with your cart full of products. This is the same as for the drug market. You are going to buy cannabis, and then they are going to sell you anything. Probably more serious, more risky drugs, and without quality control. And this is a public health problem. This is a health problem for people who use drugs, not the drug itself only. It's not only the effect of the drug. Well, and we decided to prioritize harm reduction, human rights conventions that are hierarchically superior to drug conventions. You know, conventions are hierarchically organized. And human rights conventions are above everything, over all the other conventions. So if you respect drug conventions, you're not respecting human rights conventions. And the other issue for us, very important, was national sovereignty. That means that only a country, its people, and its governors know what they need. There's nobody, bureaucratic people, that can say what are we needing to improve our social health and economical conditions. And the third aspect I want to underline is that cannabis the cannabis regulation for us is a harm reduction tool for the issue I explained, in order to separate the markets. Because this way we are going to work on, we are going to change drug effects, because adulterants, potency, and things like that. Modality of consumption, no smoking, vaping, or final products, tinctures, and things like that. And finally, because social and political answer to the problem wasn't helping a lot. We have lots of people, even haven't they criminalized in 74, our prisons were full of people for possession. The main goals of our law, there are lots of articles, I have selected only one. This is protecting democracy. You know, in Latin America, but not only, the narco states are already working. And this is a problem with massive corruption, the power, economical power of the narco traffickers. Now, at the beginning was for, they were going for the power of money, but now they are going for the political power. And in fact, they are dominating in large territories where they are the law and where they are defining social policies for because the absence of the states. And this is going on right now. To provide cannabis flowers to be vaporized for crack users, heavy crack users. And we have the first approval for by an ethical committee for a research on cannabis. And now it's at the health ministry. We are discussing some points because they want us to provide. We are not a company, and civil society and the departments of the faculty of medicine school are not also companies. We can provide the product for life for the people that has approved, has good results on the study. We are discussing these points, but it's going to be approved as well. So we suppose this year we have to get the funding to get this study run. And finally, creating a new national industry and consequently more possibilities of work for people. Latin America has very serious problems, but I think it's not only Latin America. In social inclusion with work. Some features are only organic cultures are allowed. Standards and profiles for strains to be sold in pharmacies for adult use should contain no more than 50% THC and no varieties after that. The implementation is saying no varieties without CBD. Registration, because our 3 ways of access are exclusive. You have to choose self-cultivation or being a member of a club, cannabis club, or buying at the pharmacies. That's why registration is needed, because it is anonymous. It's only your fingerprint at the pharmacy, and you get your 40 grams a month. As it said here, government determines the total production amount, price, provided strains, and gives the land to license. The producers are private, are licensed, but the conditions are provided by the government. And the control, obviously, is only by the government. No
polls, and in the way that was done in the US, that wouldn't pass. That wouldn't pass in the past, and it even wouldn't pass now. I'm going to show you the data in a minute. So, and as Raquel said, very quickly, it was aimed to reduce the leverage of criminal organizations operating in Uruguay. That's, as Raquel said, well, when consumers get to the place, when they get the cannabis or marijuana, they were not only offered cannabis, but they were offered all these sort of different drugs. So the idea was to separate, those who really just wanted to consume marijuana from the possibility to access other heavier drugs. And as I said, the initiative and the process of legalization, or regulation rather, in Uruguay basically regulates all the areas of marijuana in the country: production, commercialization, and consumption. As Raquel said, there are 3 ways of accessing marijuana. One is home cultivation, individual cultivation. The other is through cannabis clubs, and the third one that is about to be implemented by late this year is by accessing through pharmacies, right? Accredited by the state. So this is what I was telling you about before. We done a survey just by 2015. Basically, the percentage has reduced, has decreased in the last 1 year after the agreement over the law has decreased a little bit after basically almost 2 years of implementation. Even the people who oppose cannabis regulation law has increased a little bit. Why? Well, these are data from the first survey. Usually, the concerns are that marijuana is going to be harmful to people's health, that it is going to be a gateway for hard drugs, that people will continue buying illegal marijuana, and less so that marijuana consumers are a threat to society. So there was a lot of concern about security issues. Now, in 2015, we asked about whether they agree or disagree with the methods of distribution of cannabis. And what we have is, and this is very interesting, that first of all, most of the people disagree with any method of accessing cannabis, right? First. But secondly, and this is very interesting, the most rejected method is the pharmacies. It's the pharmacies. And actually, in our RTS survey and the survey that we did with heavy users, actually the pharmacies are the preferred method to access marijuana. So among those who use marijuana, pharmacies is seen as the potential, more likable method. It's not implemented yet, but they were saying to us, this is the way I want to access marijuana, through pharmacies. But for the general population, pharmacies are actually the most rejected method. Then the clubs and self-cultivation is sort of the one that receives less opposition. Now, when we talk about medical cannabis, medicinal marijuana, we have a different picture. 70% of people agree with access to medicinal cannabis, medicinal marijuana. And just 26% disagree with that. So this is a different attitude toward cannabis. And then we reformulated this issue about accessing marijuana in a different way. We asked the people how the government should actually, or how cannabis should be regulated, whether the state should control everything in the way that it's doing, right? Whether it should be some sort of private business. Private business should basically lead the way with some regulation from the state, no regulation at all, similar to the Colorado format, or keep full prohibition, right? And this is interesting because most of the people under these choices, most of the people said that the state should control everything, right? So although people rejected the law and keeps rejecting the law as it is, well, from the choices, available choices, well, people say that they will prefer the state should control it. Now, remember this. This is Uruguay. This is Latin America, Uruguay. And Uruguay has a long tradition of a society that is very state-centered, very different from the Americans too. So for Uruguayans, this is a sort of, I would say, sort of normal response on the way they expect that the state will regulate all the aspects of marijuana. Now we ask, 1 year after, if they have seen an increase in cannabis use in general, and 32% people say they have seen an increase, a lot of increase in cannabis use, almost 20%, somewhat increase, 20%. We are trying to understand this as part of this discussion that is going on about the effects of the law, and actually, if you see, it has reduced. But actually, when we ask if family or friends have used marijuana, actually that has increased a little bit. So there's something going on here, and we're still working on these two things. Then the current government by Tabaré Vázquez has also been criticized for dragging his feet in implementing some of the measures that were left by the previous government. But actually, there are a lot of challenges because, as I said before, this is a temporary regulation in which the state basically plays an important role, and they are trying to put all the infrastructure for regulation, right? And that has taken a lot of time, and that has created concerns about some sectors of the Uruguayan society. So that's part of
not the typical politician. He actually led from the front and not from behind. And that was important to actually get things done in Jamaica. And of course, civil society players were also very important because we were able to share the experiences of what was happening in Uruguay, which was very important for us. Because that actually gave us the catalyst and what's happening in the United States. Blaine Dowd is also here, civil society out of Canada. He was able to share the experiences there in the Netherlands and so on. There was, of course, an explosion in talk about medical ganja. Of course, Sanjay Gupta and all those developments were keenly noted. And as such a movement really coalesced in 2012, 2013, 2014. We had a survey done by one of the best pollsters in the Caribbean in 2013, which showed that 57% of all persons in Jamaica claim to have used ganja at some time in the past. 55% are in favor of relaxing our laws so that it's no longer a criminal offense. Then 86% felt that ganja should support use, that the government should support use of ganja for medicinal purposes. That was quite significant, and this was, of course, at the time when Sanjay Gupta and all these developments were happening, amazing developments were happening. And of course, 82% say they would be more inclined to use ganja for medicinal purposes. In Jamaica, we had a lot of talk like many other countries. It was a bit odd because, Rastafari, so, it's Jamaica, Rastafarianism, ganja, yet we had so many discussions. And in 1977, there was a joint select committee of parliament, kept on talking. Went up in 2001, that was over 20 years later, by the way. There was a national commission on ganja formed by the Prime Minister then, which really showed high interest on the part of the administration then to move forward. Did an amazing report, and we made strong recommendations, and then we kept on talking. Ended up in 2003, was reviewed in Parliament, it was endorsed again, joint select committee, we kept on talking for many years going after. The concerns, I think, primarily the fear of the United States, how would the US react to what the sovereign nation of Jamaica is doing. Also concerns, social issues, concerns about how would the Christian community react. It's a heavily Christian country. So those things had an impact on what was happening. Thankfully, by 2015, Senator Golden, who's here with us, our Justice Minister, and I believe a herbalist, decided that it's time to put the talk into some action. So he listened to the recommendations of civil society, and under very strenuous conditions, quite a bit of strain. But what was helpful was that there was support across the island, both political parties. There were elements in both parties that were just totally against it, like in every party. But really getting both parties in Jamaica to work together, it's like having Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton agreeing on the way forward. It's just amazing. So we were able to get some movement on that front, and we ended up in 2015 with the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Act. Came into operation on the 15th day of April 2015, right? Senator? Good. And we don't want to belabor you with all the details because we have all the paperwork here. But among the major provisions is regarding the possession of smoking of ganja used by ganja by persons of Rastafarian faith, and the use of ganja for medical, therapeutic, and scientific purposes. A lot of people are still wondering what the therapeutic means. And of course, some aspects of the new law will not be operational until regulations are in place, which is why I want to see what you guys are doing in Uruguay and other places. And of course, some major points. You're allowed to possess 2 ounces of ganja, and it's not that large. What percentage, Vicki, of Jamaica is small? But they have always felt oppressed by our laws, which were not very favorable to them. Smoking of ganja in a public place or within 5 meters of a public place is prohibited in a similar manner like cigarettes. A person who smokes in public cannot be arrested or detained. However, the police may issue a ticket to that person who will have 30 days to pay a $500 Jamaican fine, which is like $3 or $4 US. And I'm not sure if the tickets have been printed yet. I haven't seen any police officers with any tickets. Dr. Cathy Brown, the Solicitor General Office. No, I haven't seen those tickets, so that's a bit of good news. Smoking of ganja in privately occupied residences that are not used for commercial purposes is not an offense, but it is governed by the rules on possession of ganja that we referred before. Of course, there's even an allowance for the importation of ganja for terminal or serious chronic illnesses. That's very important because we all know about epilepsy and the many medical issues there. The cultivation of ganja by households, each household is allowed to legally grow no more than 5 ganja plants on their premises. If there's more than 1 household on any premises, each household may grow 5 plants. Thing is, you have households within households. So people will end up with 30 plants, and you're like, but it's 1 household. But they're like, no, there's 6 households here. Really? So take some account of that. Spoke about the Rastafari, persons 18 or older who are adherents to the Rastafarian faith or Rastafarian organizations may apply for authorization to cultivate ganja for religious purposes, and that's really looking out for the Rastafari community, who have really been at the front of the ganja law reform movement for so long, and they deserve this recognition and this respect. And of course, events to celebrate and observe Rastafarian faith. Persons who are adherents of the Rastafarian faith or Rastafarian organizations may apply for an event promoted or sponsored by them to be declared an exempt event. So we have had pretty much ganja festivals. The Cannabis Cup was in Jamaica, which was done with the Rastafari community, Rastafari Roots Fest. That was allowed. Of course, for our many, well, when you come to Jamaica, you'll be a tourist. So visitors who are users of medical marijuana, you know, people who do not ordinarily reside in Jamaica, so if you're a tourist, you may apply for a permit. Now that is yet to be implemented, Mark. That's going to be a work in progress, but essentially we'll allow. By the way, it's funny because most tourists actually come to Jamaica and think ganja is actually legal. So we're going to have to clarify that with the tourists who are coming to Jamaica, but it will allow them to lawfully purchase and possess up to 2 ounces of ganja at a time for medical or therapeutic services purposes.
Call what was done in Jamaica a Caribbean model, a model that is a cultural model, a people-centered model. And that's important to note because, as my colleague stated, it's built around people's lives. And I'll give you a background to that. He mentioned the whole issue of the Rastafari movement. And in that movement, there was a lot of abuse of those persons. A minority, even they weren't a very popular group. But we found that the ganja laws, and excuse me if I say ganja because culturally that's what we call it, not cannabis, ganja. But we're talking about the same thing. So the ganja law was used to repress this particular group of persons. In 1962 or 61, there was an invasion of the Pinnacle, where a community, a small community of traditional Rastafarian growers were abused, and at the time 300 pounds was a lot of money, and that was taken from one particular grower, and the entire community was dismantled in a bid to enact this law. So those persons were being arrested, they were being abused. And that was in 1960. In 2014, a young man in Jamaica, Jamaican citizen, and I actually was toying whether I should show that picture or not, and I decided against showing the picture. Because a young man by the name of Mario D, a young man, son, on his way to work, construction worker, and his only offense in Jamaica was to have a spliff, what we call a joint, a marijuana joint. He was arrested, taken to jail, and somehow, because to this day we don't know how he was beaten or who beat him, but he was beaten to death. He died. What? Joint, spliff. And at that time, we were still working at the legislation, and thankfully, as my colleague pointed out, our Justice Minister then, Minister Mark Golding, decided that, okay, enough was enough, and he also was a part of the conversation, and we decided, listen, enough of that. So those were some of the stories, and that's just the tip of the iceberg as to how the law was being applied, and we said no. So the amendment that allows for the possession of 2 ounces or less was meant to treat with cases like those. Hence, that's why I say to you, it's a human rights approach. We're talking about a society in which cannabis or ganja is used by almost everyone in the poorest class of society. And Mario wasn't a Rastafarian. He was just a young Jamaican citizen. So that is one of the cases. That's households that were growing and some using for that. And so therefore, to kind of alleviate the problem, we said, okay, the 5 plants will be used for those households who so chooses. It brings us also to the medicinal framework. And in reviewing the commentary on the UN document, it's good to know that medicinal doesn't necessarily mean your regular medicine, but also takes into account the traditional medicine. Because, again, not just only the Rastafarians, but the Maroons are known to use cannabis, ganja, medicinally for the treatment of various ailments. And there is for years, been a growing field of nutraceutical, naturopaths, doctors, some in Jamaican language and the Caribbean language we call them bush doctors. So they use plants, and cannabis is one of those main plants. So we're saying, okay, let us make a pathway for those persons who are so desirous of being in that field. Now, that is also part of the conversation happening, because what we have found is that against the regular medical physicians, there is now a controversy as to how do we regulate these persons who are now will be expected in a number of cases to write prescription. So that's another conversation that is happening. And however, it's a conversation that we encourage because, again, it is bringing us into a different environment to look at medical marijuana in a different light. So that is as it relates to the use of marijuana medically. Another point to note where that is concerned is that for years, and this brings us now to the research aspect of the use of marijuana or cannabis or ganja. We initially started back in the days when they would raid a farm, some parts of the university would be allowed to get the plants to do studies. They don't have control over that. One noted scientist was Dr. Albert Lockhart, who developed cannabis from that, but under very adverse conditions. We currently have local-based firms, such as Medicanja with Dr. Lowe, and even our own universities who wants to do that kind of research. As a matter of fact, ministerial orders were granted to our 2 universities to conduct those research in that area. So it is an area for potential development, not just for our growers, but also for our scientists and our students, opportunities to learn. So that is where it, as it concerns looking at research. Another important point as it relates to the arrest, in 2016, our then Minister of Justice mentioned in a report, said that the arrest for possession of cannabis had gone down to a little under 14,000. Now, for Jamaica, that is significant because you used to have a number of those cases clogging up our legal system as it relates to minor fines and charges that could take forever to clear. So you have cleared that hurdle and you have gotten rid of that. Now, developmentally, and I want us to understand that for us in the Caribbean, and I dare say the Caribbean because this conversation is happening with other countries such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines as well, and other our Caribbean neighbors. It is not only a financial issue, but it's a developmental issue, a community developmental issue. Because as I said before, a number of traditional communities are built on marijuana, ganja production. You have children of persons who are given an opportunity to go to the university through that trade. I'd like for us to see it as a sustainable development matter. I've heard the argument internationally about alternative development, and I'm saying to us that where we are in terms of looking at regulating, and this is a conversation we have been having, because as I said, it's an actor-based approach. We have included the traditional communities. We have included our women. And the developmental goals, and I picked out a few of them because it is important that we understand what this is. It's not just, and what our mission here this week is for. Now you're talking about no poverty, one of the first goals for sustainable development. Communities are built on cannabis, are built on ganja. And I'm saying to you, if we have a system where they are regulated properly, and these persons are included in that regulated framework, you can create communities for development. And we're having issues in the Caribbean because persons are hearing about the dollar value that is being made in Colorado and other places. And we're saying, hey, be careful. As was stated in the Botec report, there are things that we have to put in place to get it right. But it's a possibility for poverty reduction because it is being done under an illegal framework, and we need to move these persons who are citizens of our countries into a legal framework for the removal of poverty. So that's an option there. Zero hunger. Now this again is another conversation happening in the Caribbean and in Jamaica. We're saying the alternative development tells you alternative to these crops. We have said no. Let us look at it, because you're not going to get them out. They're not leaving. But we say under a regulated framework, you can ask persons to, in addition to this crop, also consider planting this crop. So you have balance and you create an environment where you can have, okay, cassava, for example, is something as food development and is being used by a beverage company. That's a food, in addition to the cannabis plant. So, and again, the whole issue of good health means nutraceutical, nutraceuticals, and that's something that is heavily pushed by our Rastafarian community. Engage them in that conversation. Industry and development and innovation. We have the possibility now of creating meaningful scientific industries out of this. Meaningful, I mean, hemp is, there's possibilities for